Welcome back. I hope you had a full grip of setting up the email and password authentication using Firebase. This time we're going to set up the Google Authentication, which is one of the fastest form of authentication which is out there for all users. So let's get started. Integrating Google SignIn into an Android application using Firebase is quite simple, but we need to follow some steps. Let's start off with the build Gradle. Let's straight to the module app. You have to include a dependency. We add the Firebase Auth dependency included earlier on when we're talking about the email and password. Now you need to include the GMS, that's the Google Play Services Authentication, the 10.0.1. Make sure the version you are pointing at is the same thing with the version of the Firebase authentication you used. After doing that, you synchronize Gradle and set up your application. Let's get to look at the layout so we understand the layout structure of this demo. Let's set a preview. Let's quickly look at the preview. Now we have this wrapped around in a constraint layout, which is the default constraint layout you use if you are using Android Studio 3 points upwards, 2 points upwards, and 3. Right there in the constraint layout, we have it set up to match the context, which is the main activity as a class, and we have the absolute y and x coordinates. We gave y it's 1dp, y the x is 0dp. We have an image view, which we're seeing right there, which is by default the Google sign. This is actually going to change to the picture of your profile in Google. So we have it set up with an ID of profile image, and the compact, the source of the drawable, is actually coming from the Google sign in button as an icon dark button. So you can actually create that, and we actually did some constraints to the right, left, bottom, and top of the layout to actually match the parent. But for the bottom, it's actually going to be underneath the email text, so it's actually going to sit above the email text. We're having the email text followed after this. This actually going to display your email. If you've signed in successfully, it's going to have that displayed. So that's the portion. We have an ID for that called email text, and we also create the constraint layout to the right, bottom, top, and left of the parent. The right and left is for the parent, while the bottom is for the button 2. The button 2 rather, since we're going to have a button underneath it, and for the top bottom off, so definitely there's something on top of it, which is the Google image as default, which will actually change to your profile image. So let's get to look at the third text view we're going to be talking about. This is the status. It's actually going to point out your status if you're signed in or signed out. That's the two status we need, that you're signed in or signed out. And we also did the constraints to also make that sit appropriately, which is actually going to be the top of the button 2, which is going to sit at the top of a button. There's a button underneath, which we've seen that highlighted, and it's actually sitting at the bottom of the email text, which is actually this. So let's get to look at the button, which is the Google sign in button. This has an ID of button 2, and the text on it is Google sign in, just to depict that we are going to trigger a sign in to Google. And we also create some constraints around it as well. So this time the top, the right to the constraint right is the parent, while the constraint left also is going to match the parent. And the bottom now, we have a button 3, which is actually sitting button, which is the sign out button. And to the top we have the status text, which we have talked about earlier. Let's get to look at the last button, which is the sign out and sign in button. This is actually going to be a toggle button. It's actually going to sign out when you have signed out, and sign in when you're signing. So you have that set up, and you also declare the constraints around it to the right, the left, to the parent. The bottom is also to the parent, since we don't have any field or any input at the bottom. And the top is the button 2, which we have right there. So that set up the layout. We'll be able to understand how these are flow. So from here, we'll be looking at the classes involved. We have just one class, the main activity, and in the main activity, let's get to look at that, and we can easily find out how to integrate the Google authentication and also get that done. Let's quickly get to look at that. And before I proceed, as I've always done, we'll get to look vividly on the buttons. If we really have an on-click to a method in each of the buttons, let's look at the Google sign in button. Do we have an on-click? Yeah, we have an on-click right on the Google sign in called the sign in method. So you should expect that to trigger from the button XML. Let's look for the sign out. We have an on-click as well for the sign out, which is the sign out method. So that's going to set that up. So let's take a brush down through the main activity. This extends App Compact activity as always and implements the Google API client. That's the on connection field listener. Because this is the callback that we're going to expect. Is that is successful or it failed? That's the connection to the Google API client. We created an object for this called the Google API client, and we create a finite integer. The static finite integer for the sign-in, just an identifier. Gave it 1001, and we are expecting the profile image, the text view, that's for the image text, for the status text, and the Firebase authentication. We create an object for that called FB auth, and also the auth listener, that's the Firebase authentication state listener. In our onCreate method, we set the content view to the activity main, which I've just explained, and we instantiate the profile image, the image text, status text. We call the appropriate ID to the variable, to the field we declare. Now we need to set the image text to be empty at present at first, but we're still going to pass in some values into that text. This status text should be signed out at default, should be signed out. And let's get to look at how we integrate the Google sign-in options. We create an object called SignIn Options and instantiate the Google sign-in options builder, and we need to build that up. First of all, we'll get to look at the attributes that we passed into this builder. We have the sign-in options, which is the default sign-in we've specified, which we specified, and we need to request the ID token. This is actually going to get the default web client ID. It's actually default out of the box from the Google sign-in options class, and also we request the email of the user, and you're going to request the profile of the user, and we're going to build the sign-in options up. So we're going to have a dialog that actually going to get that done for us. Let's get to look at the Google API client. We instantiate that as well, and we set enable auto manage to this class, and also you're going to add the API, which is the Google sign-in API. That's the first attribute from the authentication, and the sign-in options, which we've actually set up here. We've done the builder there, and we build that up as well. So we now have the sign-in options and the Google API client set up. The Firebase authentication, we need to instantiate that as well, whereby we get the Firebase auth get instance, so the object is usable. The same thing goes for the authentication listener. I think we've talked about that during the email and password flow. The only aspect we are adding now is the Google sign-in option and the Google API client. The same thing happens to the Firebase. We get the current user with the user object. Now we need to test the user at this point. If the user is not equals to null, you're going to set the text from based on the email of the user, get email of the user. You're going to set the text to the status text that has been signed in, that if the user is not null. And you're still going to display the image, that's the profile image of the user. You get the photo URL. If the photo URL is not null, you need to test that, and you get the photo URL of the user, which is actually going to be triggered from the display image method. Get to talk about that method in the course of the tutorial. Let's just keep it like that. Else, if probably the user is empty, the set text to the image text should be empty, definitely that means the user is signed out. The user is not signed in, and we do have to call the drawable, the appropriate drawable, which is the Google sign in button icon tag, to display as the profile image. That sets it up. Now for the sign in method that is going to be triggered from the XML. I showed you that earlier. This is going to call a sign in intent object which we create, and let's see how we get that done. We call the Google Signin API, that's from the auth class. We also get the sign in intent, and we pass the Google API client. We've done that wherever we build it, the Google API client with the SignIn Options. So we have the Google API client object working, and you start activity for results. Anytime you start an activity for results, you need to override the onActivity results, which is the callback that you will be getting. So let's get to look at the callback, the onActivity for results. This takes three parameters: the request code, the result code, and the data, that's the intent data, which you still need to point to the super, that's the super class of the onActivity result, and pass this parameter into it, the result code, the request code, and the data. Now an if statement here: if the request code is equals to the RC sign in parameter over here, you call the Google sign in result, create an object from that, and this time the Google sign-in API, you get the sign-in result from the intent, that's from the data passed. And if the result is successful, you get an object from the Google sign-in account, that's the account of which is unique to each Google user, and we have the result to get the sign-in account. We trigger the authentication with Firebase. This is a method, a private method that actually helps us to authenticate with Firebase, and it passed a parameter called the account, and this account is gotten from the Google sign-in account of that user. So let's get to else the Google sign-in failed. Let's get to look at the authentication with Firebase that takes in the Google sign-in account object. We have the authentication credential, which we created an object for that, and we need to initialize it with the Google Auth provider. That's going to get the credentials of that particular user. And we also trigger the account get ID token, and that's the null is the second parameter when you are getting the credential. Now let's get to look at the sign in with credential, which is from the Firebase Auth. That's the Firebase Authentication as a listener, which you pass in the credential that you actually got in from the authentication credential. You add Uncomplete listener to this, that's on full complete, which you pass this class, and the second parameter is going to be an instantiated Uncomplete listener. This is generic that you pass the auth result as the parameter of the generic class. So that sets it up for the authentication with Firebase. So that authenticates the user with Firebase. You still need to override another method when we have to, you implement the Google API client on connection field listener. So you need to override the Uncomplete method. In this Uncomplete method, this takes the tags, which is the result we gotten from the Uncomplete listener, and now if the tags is not successful, it's going to say that the Firebase authentication failed. That's which is going to actually notify the user that failed. And on sign out, that means you're going to actually disconnect from the Google sign-in API, whereby you set the result callback, and that's going to be a callback as well as this. You need to override on result. We override the Uncomplete when we have a complete listener callback, but this time on result callback, you override the result and get that signed out. On connection failed, which we actually got right there, you need to override that as well. It takes the connection result as a parameter. Now it's going to notify Google Play Services failure. The display image method will be triggered, and you pass the image URL, which is the URI, to the part of the image, and you download the tags, that's the image tags. Trigger the download image tags to actually get the profile image of the user, and this is going to be done in the background using the async tags. That's why we add a class called the download image tags. That's an inner class in this class, which extends the async tags and takes the string, the void, and the bitmap as the generic parameters, and it's going to download the image appropriately. This we have a doing background method to actually get that done, and a try and catch block, which actually gets an input stream object in a Java nets this from the Java library just to open the stream, and the bitmap factory also is going to decode the stream and pass the in as parameter. So this is going to actually get the image downloaded for us. So we have the onPost execute, whereby the bitmap image is going to set the image to its appropriate result. On start, on stop, these are the life cycle of the activity. On start, you need to add the authentication state listener, and on stop, you need to remove the authentication state listener. That's just it. This notify the user by a toast. We have that even in the email and password authentication. So with that, you can actually set up your authentication with Google. And even if you want to move to another activity, it's from on success. It's from on the unsuccessful results, you get to move to another activity, and that's just a little trick which can be done without much hassle. So with this, we've actually come to the end of this Google sign-in authentication, and I'll be showing you the screencast of this flow, and I will implore you to lay onto the source code as well so that you'll be able to understand it. Thank you guys for hanging out with me throughout this session, and please don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Have a blessed time. Bye bye.